A big topic of discussion has to do with Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp signing a suppression election law bill into law. And Ben Shapiro is like many of the conservatives who love to play stupid and act as if they don't really understand how this would negatively impact people's rights to vote. Now, before we get to his stupid video, let me tell you some details of what this law indicates. For instance, the new law removes the Georgia Secretary of State as the chair of the state elections board. Instead, the law lets the state legislature, which has been under unified Republican control since 2005, appoint a chair of the board. Now, remember, during the 2020 general elections, there was a lot of pressure for the chair to essentially do what Trump wanted him to do, just find some votes. So it would put Trump over the top to ensure that he won that state. There was no evidence of voter fraud from the state of Georgia, none. The only reason why the Republican lawmakers in the state of Georgia passed this law is because they want to rig that state's electoral process in the Republicans' favor. There's really no other way to put this. And it would make it much more difficult for certain people to be able to vote, but this impacts all voters in the state of Georgia. Let me be clear about that. So the new law also limits how many drop boxes each county can have, how many hours and days the boxes can be open, and where they can be located. The law says that each county can't have more than one drop box per early voting site or per 100,000 active registered voters, whichever number is smaller. The provision will dramatically reduce the number of drop boxes available in some large counties. Fulton County, for example, says it would go from 38 drop boxes in the November election to 8 in the future. I should note that 44.3% of Fulton County is Black, and I'm sure that has quite a bit to do with some of the provisions that were decided upon in this legislation. I have more details for you, but before I get to it, why don't we hear the so-called cool kids philosopher show us that he's neither cool nor much of a thinker. Take a look.
It limits the use of ballot drop boxes. Oh, you mean like ballot drop boxes where people could just stuff the ballot box or take ballots out of the ballot box? It hands state officials more power over local elections. Even before the legislation passed, many voters of color in Georgia faced hours-long queues at the polls. By the way, voter suppression doesn't involve long lines, any more than long lines at Disneyland are ride suppression.
Long lines at Disneyland are ride suppression, absolutely. It's just that equating riding rides at Disneyland to our democracy is a pretty stupid thing to do. In fact, it minimizes democracy. It's just a laughable comparison. But of course, you can always rely on someone who doesn't have to deal with the type of job that could get them, in a lot of trouble just so they can take a little bit of time off and vote. Ben Shapiro doesn't live in the same world as people who work for a wage and just don't have the resources, don't have the luxury of taking the time off to go stand in insanely long lines in order to cast their ballot. But here's the thing, Brett. Ben Shapiro knows what he's doing, right? I don't think he's as stupid as he sounds in that video. I don't think he's as smart as some people try to make him out to be, but I do think he knows what he's doing there. And he's pretending as if making voting increasingly difficult has no impact on people's eligibility to vote or ability to vote when they want to cast their ballot. He knows what he's doing, and that's the most insulting part of all of this.
Yeah, at the beginning, he basically says like Jim Crow made it illegal for people to vote who are Black. This is not that. It's not illegal to vote. It's just longer lines. It makes it illegal for you to give people water if you're in line. I mean, oh God, it doesn't even do that. He just talks and talks, and he doesn't he's absolutely. There's two options, and you're right. He's either playing dumb or he's dumb. Maybe he lacks like the ability to really like understand that like just because there isn't an explicit law saying, hey, the only thing that would satisfy the criteria that Ben Shapiro is putting forward is if they wrote a law that said, we won't let Black people vote. And
even
listen,
then,
that law was on the books. That law, and he would still deny it, yeah. But that law was on the books for years and years, and it just became impossible for them to keep that on the books as written. But the fact is, Ben, as much as people on the right talk about like the marketplace of ideas winning out or not winning out, the only reason that they're changing who can vote in this state and what allows you to be able to vote is because their ideas suck. Their ideas suck because voting is the real true marketplace of ideas. Because people hear your ideas, man, they can't avoid it. And they vote based on your ideas. And guess what? The Republicans always resort to these kinds of dirty tricks. The dirty tricks where they're like, well, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. The Electoral College really upholds who gets to be president. Please ignore the fact that the Democrats get more votes than the Republicans every single time, unless it's an incumbent over the last like 25 years. Your ideas suck, bro. And it's very obvious. It's very true. If you want to talk about voter ID laws making it difficult, 11% of Americans don't have IDs. Citizens don't have IDs. You're gonna go make them get a permit. Every time I talk about how much we should make it a little more difficult, you should have some kind of documentation and a better rubric by which you can buy a gun. Something also in the Constitution, you get mad. This is your,
No, snaps to your arguments, because you're absolutely right. I mean, just closing loopholes on purchasing weapons, like for background checks. They're totally against it. Oh my God, this is a constitutional violation. They know what they're doing. Again, I just want to reiterate. Okay, now, Ben Shapiro's not as stupid as he's making himself out to be in that video. He's intentionally lying to people to minimize the damage that this law is gonna lead to in discouraging people from voting, really. Because if it's gonna be more and more difficult to vote and you have to choose between getting to your job or casting your ballot, I'm sorry, people are gonna think about their livelihoods and they're gonna go to work and they're not gonna have the ability to wait in long lines. But the one thing that I think he is pretty clueless about is issues pertaining to popularity. So you're right, Republicans and their platform is incredibly unpopular, deeply unpopular. And the Republican Party has basically spearheaded all sorts of tactics, gerrymandering, voter ID laws, all sorts of things that rig the system to their favor, right? But honestly, I really wouldn't expect Ben Shapiro, of all people, to understand what is and is not popular. I mean, we're talking about a man who he wrote a book about the evils of pornography, and then later proceeded to be completely befuddled about the wonders of vaginal moisture, right? Like, the guy doesn't really understand things about life. But what he does understand is that conservatives will cheat, will game the system to their advantage, and he's here for it. That's why he's making these ridiculous arguments and playing stupid. Under the new law, by the way, absentee ballots are allowed to be sent out to voters 29 days before an election, down from the previous 49 days before an election. Okay, I'd love to know why they're doing that, Ben. Like, why do you think they're doing that? Why are they shortening the days? They go further. Voters are allowed to request an absentee ballot a maximum of 78 days before the election, down from 180 days. Why? And the applications have to be received by elections officials no later than 11 days before the election, a reduction from the previous effective deadline of 4 days before the election. Gee, I wonder why they're doing that. After we just had an election where there was absolutely no evidence of voter fraud. In fact, the state of Georgia conducted 2 hand counts, and through their hand counts, they actually found out that Joe Biden had a few more votes than they had previously thought of or known about. But they didn't find any evidence of widespread voter fraud, that's for sure. And then you have these clowns over at Fox and Friends who just can't understand why it's questionable to not provide food or water to people who are waiting in long lines to vote. Let's watch.
The water argument is what cracks me up, though, because what line have you ever stood in? If you go to Yankee Stadium and you stand in line to get a ticket, do they serve you water? Do you care?
Just hot towels. That's all I get.
I have been voting for over 40 years.
I've never had water.
And I have never thought to myself, okay, I'm gonna go vote today. Will they have snacks?
Right.
So Brett, I want you to jump in because it's just another example of how disconnected these people are from the real world and what actual people face when they're trying to vote.
Well, yes, they make it, as you've read, they make it harder for black people to vote by making the lines longer. That's like that's the same version of the argument. It's like, I never have a problem with the police. The police treat me totally fine. I don't know what your problem is. Have you ever been a victim of racism? That's like what they're doing. That's exactly what they're doing. Also with the voter ID thing, I just wanted to get back to that. Like 25% of black voters don't have that kind of ID that they ask for, and 8% of white voters don't have that ID that they ask for. It's very obvious what's happening, and that's how they go about proving it in a court of law. And then also, man, the whole it's all the same. What you're going to end up seeing after they make these laws is they're going to do a bunch more switchbacks within 150 feet of the voting location to keep people as close to the voting location as possible, so you can't do anything. You can't give them water, and they'll keep them standing there in the hot sun, or outside for hours. And it's all about using lines to manipulate people. Like, is this guy? Oh, I've never. You go to it's so stupid and so ridiculous, and it's so obvious. And the truth, it does come down to like, prove it. They don't prove it. The Dropbox argument he's making, prove it. Does that happen?
Yep.
And when it gets stuffed, like if it's a bunch of like random ass ballots in there, they have ways of checking it. The ways that are legal, that don't make you spend an average of anywhere between $75 and $175 to go get the ID that they want you to get during a Tuesday work day. And that's what they want. They've barely been winning while cheating, and now they got to cheat more so they can have a fair shot at winning, as they determine fair, which since literally the parentheses 3/5 compromise, close parentheses, framing of the Constitution of the United States, they've been cheating for hundreds of years.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.